It's September 29th, and it is a little bit before 9 o'clock. 20 minutes before. I was talking about the effects of the pill that they gave me, how that affected my body, and then seeing what I saw on my unborn child. And this country has a lot to compensate me and my son over. I called Chris Dabney when I first found, I think when I was having the miscarriage process. And it was confirmed for sure that the baby was dead. He never returned my call. He didn't return my calls from the time that I was fired. So it wasn't like he had a continued or ever demonstrated any kind of continued interest in this child. He showed zero interest, and I think he didn't like the idea that I had said something about his paying child support. I believe that's why the United States murdered that baby. And the only individual that really knew that I was going to that hospital was this man from Radio Shack who was connected to the CIA. It was after I was living with them that I found out he worked at Radio Shack, and his brother worked as a guard for the CIA. Every day. He went to the CIA headquarters. It came up in normal conversation because, of course, you are living with people and you ask things like, so what do you do? You know, where do you work? And, you know, somebody who works for the CIA isn't required to conceal that fact. Especially if they're not a secret operative. There are many people who work for the CIA as secretaries, receptionists, technicians, guards, you know, various things. And it is not, any of those positions are not considered to be top secret. So the only CIA positions that are top secret, or that, you know, you couldn't talk about, would be ones where you are undercover. So, I had been living with them for about 1 week, or a few days, maybe a few days, day or two, a couple days, at least a couple days, before I asked him to take me to the hospital. And I did go to one ER in Falls Church, Virginia before that time to find out what was wrong, because I thought there was something wrong. And that woman there was, I believe, Italian Catholic. It was a female doctor, and she refused to do anything. She refused to even do an exam, a basic exam, and wrote me up as nuts. That was in Virginia. She supposedly didn't know me, but she made it very clear she knew who I was. And I don't remember, I say that she was Catholic, but actually I don't know if I remember correctly if she was Jewish or Catholic. I remember I did look her up and found out, but I actually have forgotten, and I don't remember now. When I was in the hospital, I had to be hospitalized there. They couldn't let me go home. because I had hemorrhaged so bad. So it wasn't like, well, okay, let's let her have this process here in the hospital, and then now you feel better now, right? Okay, now you can go home. No, I was definitely right about staying in the hospital before taking a pill like that, not knowing what kind of adverse reaction I might have. And what happened is that I did have a definite adverse reaction. I was hemorrhaging, and I didn't stop. So I was hospitalized. I was in the emergency room, and then I was in a hospital room until they thought that had stopped. And then they later told me, well, there will still probably be some bleeding, but the process has been completed, is what they said. So while I was in this hospital room recovering, I did try calling Chris. He never called back. I never heard from him again. I never heard from him again. The next time I heard his voice, it was in the background when a police officer was calling me from Maryland, who tried to obstruct me from contesting my being assaulted by the mother of those guys that I was living with then. And when I later tried to find out what religion that family was, they told me he started wearing this cross around his neck. I hadn't seen it before, but he made a big point and sort of a show of having me notice a cross that he wore. And I said, what kind of, and it was like this beaded cross, kind of like the beaded cross that I had purchased in Pennsylvania in 1994 when I was working for the Tabo family. I took a short trip to Pennsylvania with my friend Kelly, and we spent a week in Pennsylvania looking at some really neat antique shops and specialty clothing and jewelry shops. And we were at this one store, and there was some jewelry there, and I liked this one cross necklace, and it was all beaded. It looked like a Catholic rosary, but it wasn't. And it had these little beads all the way through it, forming like the top part and then the cross part, and it was beads all the way through, and then it kind of and then it was on a brown leather strap that was very long, and you could either have it kind of hanging down in a V, or you could wear it up tied against your neck as a choker. And I wore it in the V, depending on the neckline of the dress I was wearing or shirt. And then sometimes I wore it as a choker, but more oftenly I was wearing it as kind of letting the leather show and wearing it in more of a V, because chokers at that time were not, always really popular or common. It didn't go with everything that I wore. So I kind of wore it as just a regular, like, cross necklace with a pendant. And I bought that in Pennsylvania in 1994. And they told me at the time that the person who had designed it and who made them was the guy who made all the jewelry for the movie Dracula. But I never saw that movie, and I still haven't seen that movie. I just remember thinking, I just remember that because that was something you don't forget. And I liked the work on the artistry on the jewelry. And I wore that cross all the time. I wore it with almost everything. So then I noticed this guy that I was staying with. All of a sudden I noticed he had a cross, kind of a beaded type cross like mine had been. It wasn't on a leather strap like mine. And it wasn't the same kind of work. It wasn't the same sort of thing. It was kind of some of the same colors and about the same size. And I said, oh, well, where, what religion are you? Are you Catholic? Is what I asked. And he said, no, he was Orthodox Christian. So supposedly they were Orthodox Christian. And they were Nigerian. Well, their mother was Nigerian, and she was in Nigeria. And then the guy who worked at Radio Shack, his brother was a guard for the CIA, and then he brought his friend over who was also a guard with the CIA. So on one or several occasions, I was talking to 2 different guards for the CIA. And, you know, mainly I was watching TV, and I was out, I was trying to find work still, so I was still trying to do something on that end. Still trying to keep up with my son's case, Oliver's case. And then at night, everyone was watching television. So I watched television with everyone. And that's when this friend, who was also a guard with the CIA, came over. It was usually at night after work. And on weekends. And so then I was in this hospital room bleeding, and I told them that I wanted to make sure that that fetus was not destroyed. They wanted them to preserve it because, and they said, why? And I said, well, because I want to bury it or do something, but I want it preserved, and I thought I might put it in a morgue. I wanted them to release it to me, and I asked them to release it to me because you supposedly have a legal right to have your own, actually child, released to you even if it's dead. But what they said is because their law, I mean, that's how I understood it, but they said that their hospital or their laws require that it go to be sent from a hospital to a morgue, and then if a family wanted to pick up the fetus from the morgue, then they could do so. Then they could either bury it, cremate it, or take it home, take it to an investigator, whatever. The reason I wanted it preserved is because I knew there was evidence on that fetus that showed that that he, and I named him James River, that he had been murdered. And the reason why I named him James River had nothing to do with anybody I ever knew named James. I had, right around that time, forgotten that Cartwright's first name was James. And I never thought about that person that I got set up with, whose name was James, who's from Texas. Never thought about him ever. The first time I had ever heard Kate Middleton's name being mentioned ever was at the Post Pub, right before I got fired. And I probably maybe heard that her brother's name was James, but if I did, it went in one ear and out the other, and I never ever thought of it. And at that time, I didn't think they were connected to my life at all. I didn't really know any Jameses. But I chose the name James because of what it meant. I looked up different meanings. I wanted something classic, and I looked up different meanings, and I had seen the baby first, and he looked like James. He looked like a James. He just, I don't know why. I don't even really love that name specifically. It just fit him. And then I wanted something traditional and classic for the first name, but a little bit artistic for the next name, and I decided on River because a river goes on forever. So it was sort of a symbol of eternity to me, of strength and eternity.